Rarely in conversation do we hear about the state of Asian health. Despite being over 15% of the New Zealand population, it feels like this issue has dropped completely off the map. If we take the data at face value, it appears that on average, Asians in New Zealand are doing all right. But within this demographic are a super diverse population, heterogenous in culture, needs, and health risks. To help me unpack this often overlooked issue of Asian health, I'm speaking with Ivan Yeo, Deputy Director of Asian Family Services. He dispels the myths that exist and shines a light on core issues affecting the families he serves. Thank you so much, Ivan, for coming on this podcast. I think a really important thing for us to talk about is about Asian health and, within that, Asian mental health. It's a really big issue, I think, in the Asian diaspora around the world who, for Asian people who are living in Western countries, because I guess there's like a disconnect between Asian health and the Western model of care. So I'd be really interested to hear a bit from you, because you obviously work at Asian Family Services, a little bit about the work that you do there and also your own background and how you ended up in this space.
Sure. That would be a long story, to be honest.
We're here for it. That's what the podcast is for.
So let's start with just introduce myself.
Yeah.
I'm Ivan, and usually I tell people I was made in Singapore, processed from Malaysia and exported to New Zealand in 2001. And I identify myself as a Chinese Malaysian. I speak fluent Mandarin and broken English. And why I get into mental health is probably through my own experience of struggling to understand my emotion and also my own mental health. That really get me into wanting to work in the mental health sector. And my very first job wasn't because of my degree. It was because of my mental health experience, where there's an organization called Mind and Body being piloted to test a peer support model, which is funded by Auckland, Te Whatuora at the time. And so I applied the job and I got it. And since then, I've been working in mental health sector, and working in mental health foundations, and now at the Asian Family Services as a deputy director. I have to say that we also very fortunate to have an incredible, inspiring leader, because people don't understand is when you are the only person as an Asian confronting with, probably majority are Pakeha, you have to be very resilient and confident and strong to voice why Asian is not being considered in this work. So that sums up everything.
Yeah. Well, could you tell us a little bit more about your own, exploration of your own mental health issues? Because, because obviously I'm Asian myself, and when I talk to other Asian people, it's like mental health isn't really like a thing, right? In a lot of our Asian communities, I would say, my mum probably had quite a bit of mental health issues previously, and my grandmother certainly did, but, they've never sought, formal help or anything like that. My mum's fine now. She's fine now. But, it's one of those things where we don't talk about it. Absolutely. It's kind of, I would say that's that thing. What's that saying that they say? Trying to save face.
Yes.
It's shameful to have a mental health thing, because I think in a lot of Asian communities, having a mental health issue is seen as a shame. It's because you're, not strong enough. You don't have the willpower to have good mental health.
Absolutely.
So I'm really interested to understand, when you talk about mental health, was this something that you started thinking about when you were still in Malaysia or after you'd already come to New Zealand?
Very good questions, because back in Malaysia, even though I knew I wasn't happy and my childhood was quite a traumatic one, having a father who's also experienced, gambling harms, and also then we move a lot. He also affiliate with gangster. All that combined make me feel anxious all the time. However, at the time,
And how old were you, when you were going through all this?
I remember when my very first panic attack, of course, now I knew it was a panic attack. I was only in primary school because I think I'm quite a sensitive child. So I absorbed my surrounding, and at the time, our family started having quite a bit of problems because of my father, like gambling and all that. And since then, life has not been easy until like I was adult, still not easy. The differences is, I think the biggest difference is, as a collective culture, you're surrounded by people you love. My mom, my sisters, 3 of them, they're married, children. So our behavior is more of outward, collaborative style, so I will help my sister with something, or when she needed me or whatever. So I never really have time to sit down and think about myself. I knew probably I'm not happy because I also know I'm gay. But it wasn't apparent until I came to New Zealand. Suddenly, I have all the free time. No one bothering me, and I just
a lot of free time with your own thoughts.
Exactly. That's the one. That is the one. Oh, yeah. It's like, oh my God. Suddenly I hear all these thoughts and struggling to find who I am. Because I've been, helping others, and my sister, my mom. So that's kind of like my identity. Outside of that, who am I? I always felt I'm extremely lucky because I was studying social science at AUT. It gave me a foundation to kind of unpack my own culture, understand the politics in New Zealand, homosexual history in New Zealand. And I was unpacking myself and kind of slowly peeling off my skin and then rebuild it.
And how old were you when you came to New Zealand?
I was pretty old, 28.
Pretty old? Pretty old? I'm 29.
I mean, I wasn't like a, like a 19 or 18, commonly, international students, but I was an adult student.
Yeah, and what was like happening in like your own life leading up to you coming to New Zealand?
It was chaotic because, to be honest, I was even shocked the fact is my father were able to have money. I mean, I'm not rich. We're not from a rich family. And financially, like collectively as a family, we're always struggling. And I was contemplating of taking my own life at the time.
Before you came to New Zealand?
Yeah. So then my parents became worried. And so that was how Asians, dealt with problems. They say, I give you money, what do you want to do? I say, I want to go overseas and study. They say, yeah, go.
To take you away from all of your, your social network, your social safety net, and put you in a foreign country with a different language.
And I don't even think about, oh my God, is this the right things to do?
Jesus.
Yeah.
But what was going on? Like, what led you to feel so low that you were thinking about killing yourself? What was going on?
I think the biggest challenge at the time was knowing I'm gay, and I also don't feel that I can be myself in Malaysia.
Because what is the LGBTQ scene in Malaysia? Because it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because Malaysia is quite a Muslim country. Is it Muslim majority? Is that right? Yeah. Absolutely. So how do you figure that out?
I think I remember I always knew I was quite different in terms of I associate more with girls than boys. And I have 3 older sisters, so I always wanted to be like them. One day I can marry my dream, prince. So that was like, until one day I realized that that's not going to happen in the class when I tell my teacher I want to be a housewife or something.
Did you actually say that?
Yeah, I was quite
What was the response?
Of course, everybody laughed.
Ivan's just joking. What a clown.
Like, actually, you're not because as a kid you don't people don't understand gender and sexual orientation. I'm just wanting to be protected. That was just my feeling. Like being neglected and all that. And I happened to read a newspaper describing what is homosexuals in Mandarin newspaper. And I remember I read it through, probably that was age 12. And then suddenly everything just clicked. It's like, oh, I am that. But in a country where, of course, traditional is preserved, that kind of life have a blueprint. You just have to duplicate, and then that, duplicate. Sorry, you just have to duplicate the same blueprint. That would be your answer for life. And so I felt I'm going to let down because also I'm the only son, and also just couldn't live up to the expectation of what that means in the patriarchal society as a manhood. Now looking back, I felt like I am extremely lucky because my father, he faced a lot of problems himself. So now his son is not a gangster,
So for him, the bar was quite low.
Yes.
So, is that what you're saying? Oh, God.
Yes. So it's like, oh, you gay. It's okay. So now
Could have been worse.
could have been worse. So I was like, wow, they love my partner.
Yeah. That's good.
That's so lucky. So it was hard. It's not easy, but I look back, I just feel like I'm just so grateful. And hence, learning from my own experience, I really want to share it with the world, especially seeing first line, when I was working as a peer support, I keep seeing Asians, especially who access our services, have a lot of stigma compared to when I'm working with, Pakiha and all that. They talk to me freely. They still believe that they can have dreams. When I work with, Asian populations, at the time was mainly Chinese, they have very negative views about their own mental health. They don't want to let other people know. They reluctant to socialize. Compared to Pakiha, there's a certain degree of that as well. But it's just if you put it into a continuum, Chinese is on the extreme end. And so that's when I start asking question why, and then I realized that because the Like My campaign, which is pretty big in 20 years ago.
The what, sorry?
They call Like Minds Like Mine. So it's anti-stigma and discrimination campaign that came out from Mason's jury inquiry into the mental health systems, and what he found and recommended to the government at the time is that there were a lot of people experiencing stigma and discrimination.
This is in New Zealand?
In New Zealand. Sorry, thank you. Despite they are the most vulnerable, that was... Sorry, I also have to go back to the factors because mental health was deinstitutionalized at the time. And so the people who've been, locked up for a good time of their life suddenly say, now go back to society. There's no support and whatsoever. And there were a few very high profile of individual being attacked by people with mental distress. And so New Zealand society in general were really anxious. And hence that inquiry, called Mason's inquiry, I think it's 1998, if I'm not wrong, came about the time and then start looking at the directions, including setting out mental health commissions, which was the very first one, ring-fencing mental health funding, setting out the blueprint for mental health services and all that. And anti-stigma were part of that recommendation, which was picked up and then by the government at the time. and evolving into a very successful first in Western world nationwide campaign. And then there's a whole other history, because they also they did tracking survey of individual attitude and behavior, so they were able to track people relationship about mental health, and then seeing how it changed. And then about 10 years then John Cohen depression started, and then that's where how New Zealand's mental health attitude will change. However, if you put someone new to New Zealand, never being influenced by others, they do not have the same background understanding.
Right. So as in like new immigrants to New Zealand went there around the time of the early 2000s with the institutionalization of like mental health provision. So they don't really understand like the fact that we actually do need to destigmatize mental health. Right. Yeah. Gotcha. And
also, and another thing also, because, like sometimes we forget the mental health is a Western biomedical models, and it's the only model in the world that separate mind and body. And so that's how it framed. And even though if you look at the other Asian culture, there's no equivalence of those languages. And hence, when you're trying to translate, literally people are translating the English medicalized languages to their native language. And that can become misinformed. In the early day, when people experience psychosis, it was translated as perversions of mental illness in that Mandarin language. So, and people don't stop and think about all that have such a strong influence from where they came from. And however, we all have our mental health, but it framed in different way, like, Tai Chi, yoga, in the Eastern world, where it emphasizes on cultivating mind and body. Hence, we always advocating for any people when working with Asian, try to understand what is their understanding of mental health, their view about mental health, and also having a little bit of psychoeducation. You hear they say funny things like, "Oh, I think this is like white people problems."
As in only white people have mental health problems.
Exactly, but they in some way they're right. What they're trying to probably is that is how they frame it. That's why there's a problem in.
If you don't measure it and you don't diagnose it, it doesn't exist, right? Yeah. I think it's interesting to talk about how the Western model is the I guess like the biopsychosocial kind of model. And it kind of brings it back to what you were saying before about how, Pākehā people tend to be, a bit more open about it. And I guess I've been thinking about it a lot recently. Has it sort of swung, so the pendulum swung so far, because, you get people almost, I think, over pathologizing mental health as well. So, people, I think especially the younger generations are more likely to throw around, diagnoses of, I'm so depressed, or I'm so anxious, and not real, or like I've got anxiety or whatever. And I think there are people who genuinely have, what we say, generalized depression disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. But, I think there are a lot of people who have a bit of malaise, they're a bit sad or a bit depressed, or they do have, genuine tendencies to be anxious. But I think there's almost like in Western culture, there's almost an over pathologization. I think people talk about it like almost like too much, to the point where it's like people are making it almost trendy to be depressed or be anxious. And so it's like, I think we need to find, a balance in between.
I agree as well. And also, I think there's another challenge that my generation need to understand is the world is so different from the young people now, because the accessibility of technology. And in some way, sometimes I felt sorry for the younger generation, because to be honest, I can't even imagine how it's like when you constantly get to prepare yourself, compare yourself with image that you've seen on all this social media. And what parents or even just the society as a whole, we also haven't think about how then we having those dialogue and also a constructive skill to develop their problem solving skills. I mean, like the emotion with yourself, how do I understand when I'm feeling overwhelmed, and what does it mean when I say I can't cope? And the idea is to learn then what are the solutions I can apply in my own situation. I'm talking also from someone who experienced depression, anxiety, and I'm very fortunate, even from Asian Family Services, to have a monthly supervision because my C understand my condition, and I was able to find someone who's just extremely helpful. And he helped me to develop a lot of coping skills. He helped me to develop skills that I'm not good at. However, I felt like also because I have learned a lot of mistakes, so I'm able to accept that kind of coaching. But I also want to acknowledge that because of what he have been able to provide, it made me grow as a person. And hence, my thinking is, if we emphasize on mental health well-being and then we keep emphasizing, you just need to do mindfulness, you just need to do this and that. However, it's to look at individual where their gap is, and then how can I bring the skill that you need to change the behavior that, like bothering myself. Yeah.
It's and also I want to talk a bit more about the mind body connection, right? Because like you say, in a lot of Asian cultures, it's it's one thing, it's one and the same. You can't separate the two. And what I've been finding a lot is a lot of people are presenting to like when I see them in my own practice are presenting with physical symptoms that are related to mental health issues, and it's quite interesting when. A common thing that happens is that adults, so people in their maybe 30s or 40s, often come to the emergency department with chest pain, right? And when we hear chest pain, the thing we want to make sure is that they haven't had a heart attack, right? Yes. And so we get a lot of young-ish people, say people in their 30s, and they'll have chest pain, and clearly, it's clearly it's not a heart attack because we've done tests, and it's clearly not a heart attack. And, I just talk to them and I ask them a little bit more, a few more questions about, what's going on in your life, are you stressed? Your blood pressure is a little bit high, what's been going on? And it has been a few Asian patients as well. And then they say, oh, no, I'm not stressed. And then their partners might be like, oh no, she's stressed. And then you're like, yeah. And then and then you see the light bulb switch an hour later when they're like, oh yeah, I think it was just stress, eh? And so there's a lot of people who come to the hospital with physical symptoms and they haven't quite made sense of the fact that actually these physical symptoms are as a result of like mental health. It's not separate, but I guess like how I explain it to people, because it happens in children as well. Absolutely. We often get children who come to the hospital with abdominal pain or recurrent or chronic abdominal pain, and we do a lot of tests, and then we make sure it's not appendicitis or anything else dangerous, but it happens all the time. We frequently get kids coming to hospital with chronic abdominal pain, and you do see like a light bulb switch when you talk to parents and you say, oh well, there's this thing called the mind-body connection, right? Because you actually have many neurons in your gut as you do have in your brain. So no wonder why when people are distressed, they feel it in your gut. You got to wonder, like, where do these like sayings come from? Feeling it in your gut, trusting your gut. It's because, when you don't feel so well in your gut, it's probably because you don't feel so well in your mind.
Absolutely. I totally agree, because I'm so pleased to hear you say that, because one of the things is really important to understand is even mental health can have a different manifestation, because people assume, like just because someone who have mental distress, they will be able to verbalize their stresses. And a lot of study have done that I can't quote anyone, but I know they have looked at Asians. Usually they are more somatic.
That's right. Yeah.
Instead of psychological, as compared to hands, like even myself, like when I get stressed, my chest stuck. But I never go to, because I know it's my anxiety. So I know nothing.
Do you think you're having a panic attack? Sometimes, sometimes you have to say that, right?
Exactly. That's I can tell myself, breathe, Ivan, breathe. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another challenge. That's why we've seen a lot of, even not taking into account, and we worry that when people come, then it became too late, because, all the stresses has been bothering up. And when we do presentation to international students, we often let them understand it's like, if you keep building out that stress, it's almost like blowing a balloon until it can't contain anymore. And so it's finding a healthy way, either exercise, like mindfulness, to be able to just relieve and let go.
I think it's something that just people in general, especially in Western societies, don't understand, is that actually we're working ourselves into an early grave with our current lifestyle. So I see people, young people in their 30s who are probably walking around with high blood pressure, and impaired glucose tolerance, so early diabetes, high cholesterol, and they're walking around and you don't have symptoms of that. You can't feel those things. It's only when you do tests that you find those out. And people are literally working themselves to an early grave because they're working so hard. They're not looking after themselves with diet and exercise. And it's interesting because I feel like previously in my medical training, the idea was like, lifestyle, it's so hard to make the individual change the lifestyle, and so which is why we need to prescribe them these medicines and all that, because we can't expect people to make lifestyle changes because it's too hard. And I'm like, oh God, because I know like making lifestyle changes are hard. Which is why I never tell people. I tell people never do something like a 30-day challenge, because that is not sustainable, right? It's about making small changes, like can you take the bus instead of driving? Because even just taking the bus, you walk a bit more. Can you take the stairs instead of a lift? All those little changes, right? And it makes me think more and more about the bigger picture of how can we make our society and our environment more more health friendly. Can we make more public transport, make more cycleways? These are important things in terms of cost savings for a society in the future. And can we make people less stressed in their work? Because people, if you're so stressed out now, we're really going to have to pay for it later. And then I guess with Asian cultures as well, it's still common to see that the tiger parenting, and still common to see, a lot of Asian people work themselves to the bone, probably more so in Asian countries than say in the Asian diaspora around the world. But that can't be healthy. I mean, what do you have any insights into what's going on in mental health, say for people back in Malaysia or, in other Asian countries?
I totally agree what you say. Just coming back to that self-care, the thing is, I am able to hold down a full-time job with my depression and anxiety. People don't know, like I wake up early, 5 o'clock, doing yoga, go to bed about 8 or 9 o'clock. I'm pescatarian. I was a vegan at one time, but it was too boring. So I decided to become. But I also do Muay Thai, kickboxing, like I do mindfulness, and I cannot do it because just my mental health is quite fluctuated. And sometimes people, I don't know, like we assume they will just come naturally to us. And as you say, you have to start somewhere, and also not to have the whole pie at once, but just slowly eating it. So until it became, like something that we ingrained to. And the second thing is, I think coming from Asian countries where we are overpopulated, to get ahead means that you have to work harder. You have to excel in order to get to the top. And despite the parents then decided it's not good for the children, moved to New Zealand, those beliefs still ingrained to the parents. Hence, like if you look at some of the guru who have done cross-cultural communication and study looking at the behavior, collective and individualistic culture, Asians tend to focus on a long-term goal, like long-term goal. So as soon as children being born, probably
just picking out the universities that they're going to.
Stanford. Exactly. And I think it's good to have those aspirations. And it's always about balancing, because we also provide, Asian Family Services also provide incredible parenting in Japanese and Mandarin languages. And a lot of parents, when they came to our courses, they struggle to have the relationship with their kids. After they completed the classes, they realized that the first thing they need to focus is building on the relationship with their kids. It's not about measurement of their achievement. So that was the biggest shift. And also because of our hierarchical structures of belief in collective culture, and we emphasize on role instead of as a human being person. Consequently, moms, start taking on that kind of senior role of I need to educate my children. So I'm the provider, I'm an educator, instead of seeing them as someone who going to help this little person grow to who she, he, they, them going to be. So that is the biggest difference when you see, how Asian parenthood and people who, growing up in here. So we use different methods, including kind of bring that Western model of parenting, but also making it accessible for Asian parents, where both have some good things.
Yeah, because I think the best probably lies somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
I think about my parents' parenting, and I think I was very, very fortunate, because I think my parents came in the early 90s, and I think my dad saw how, a lot of Asian parenting was done, and he was like, oh, that's not good. Because I'm the older daughter, and my dad was saying how, previously, before I was born and all that, I think he I don't know if he had the idea, but he said, especially in Chinese culture, they said, oh, it's really good to have a daughter first and then have a son, because then your daughter will help you raise the son. Yes. And this is what he told me later on when I was a teenager, and he's like, yeah, I thought that was a really bad idea. I'm really glad we didn't do that. And I'm like, thank you. Thank you very much.
Very sensible parents.
Yeah, very sensible. I was very, very lucky. Yeah. There are some overlap with, what I see on social media in terms of what people have had with, Asian parenting and all that. And I think I was very lucky. My parents were very warm and affectionate, which I would say is probably not, I guess it's not normal for, first generation Asian parents, I think. So I was very lucky. Wow. I remember my dad saying sometimes we'd go to family gatherings, like family friend gatherings, and, my little brother, who's 3 years younger than me, and he would have been, 4 at the time, would just go and sit on my dad's lap for no reason, just to give dad a cuddle. And all the other dads were like, what? How did you get him to do that? Yeah. And then my dad was like, oh, he just does that, because he's affectionate with me and my brother, so we're affectionate back with him, And so I guess that affection is undervalued, I guess, a little bit. I wonder if it's Asian parents wanting to be strong and showing their child, discipline with their emotions and things like that, but then ended up having a bit of a disconnect, I guess, with their own kids.
Yeah, I try to understand that myself as well, because I think if I just talking from a general term, from what I understand and study, is that collective culture, we more of that action orientated. It means that, we might do things on behalf of someone as a way to showing love.
Oh, when we all fight over the bill at the end of Yamcha.
Yeah. That one too. Absolutely. And it's a way to show respect. So we don't tell people I love you it's awkward, you know, like it's like even I can do it over the phone with my mom, find it hard because we're just not taught. I think I can't, but when I look at some of the study, they say Asian culture tend to be comfortable of expressing some of the happy emotion, displaying it, but not necessarily expressing it when it's one-on-one setting. But I don't know what it is. However, because of that, that's been, you know, like embedded pretty much, you know, like in our society. But I think a couple of things that is because of the hierarchical structures of the society and also patriarchal society. People don't feel that they have permission sometimes to show, especially in the old day, you know, like when senior have to assert that kind of authority. That's just my assumption. Whereas I agree, you know, like one of the things I love about New Zealand is the expressing of your affection of you know, like people you respect and admire. And I often think that, again, you know, like, and I hear a lot of 1.5, which is people who were born overseas as a young age, came to New Zealand before the age of 12 and then assimilated to New Zealand culture, but they still have both culture. And some of them has expressed it can be a challenge because when you hear your peers, you know, a family freely expressing how they feel of each other, but they never get it or hear that. Despite the parents obviously think, you know, I work hard, provide to you, give you everything, cook your favorite meal. That's the way I showing love. But yet the children don't understand. And I think there's a little bit of that kind of dialogue need to happen. Otherwise, you know, like children and young people might feel lost, like, you know, like what
That's hard, I think, because I don't know about all Asian parents, but, you know, I think there's been at different points at different times a lot of civil unrest in a lot of, you know, countries in Asia, right? So, for example, my parents, you know, grew up in times of really difficult hardship. My dad was 6 years old when his father passed away, actually through malnutrition from starvation, basically, because during one of the Great Leap Forward or Cultural Revolution, I always forget which one. And so, you know, my dad went through some really, really hard times. He's the youngest of five, I think, 5 or 6. And he, you know, ended up having to do the thing where all the adults had to go into the countryside to like live for a bit. So he lived through that. You know, so my dad lives through some really difficult times in China, you know. So I imagine there are a lot of Asian parents who, you know, that generation who came around that time who've been through some really difficult times. And I guess there's trauma from that. And I guess I'm just really lucky that somehow my dad didn't pass any of that trauma on to me. Like, he tells me a lot of these stories, and so I'm very aware of, you know, what had happened in that part of the world in the past. So I'm very grateful that he came to New Zealand. But there are also the other stuff, right, of growing up in New Zealand. When you look like this, you know, it is what it is. But I want to ask a little bit more about your relationship with your father. You know, do you guys talk about, you know, the stuff that happened in the past in terms of the gambling and the mental health stuff? Because, you know, we know a lot about adverse childhood experiences, right? A lot of research is well documented that has profound effects on a child's development and their later, like, academic, economic achievement and later mental health as an adult. Like, have you guys like talked about that much, or, you know, is it something that sort of you just moved on, or if you're, you know, wanting to talk about that?
Yeah, till date, it's still a challenge, you know, like while talking to my father, because we don't have, even though, of course, I will always love him, he will always love me, but we just don't have that relationships. Because I remember I hated him to my gut growing up, because I saw how and what he has done to destroy, you know, like our family, my mom. And
are they still together, your parents?
Yeah, she's very traditional, so you know, like, they don't believe in separating, divorce and all that. I'm grateful the fact that, you know, like, my father's still in our life now, coming to 52 52. You know, I forgave him, but it was really
You're
hard.
52?
Yeah.
Oh, you look great. You don't look 52.
It was too kind. Too kind. I tell people this is hard work to maintain this.
I was like, there's not a single grey hair there.
I'm very lucky as well. Like, that's from my parents.
Is that natural? Is your hair natural?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I'm pretty safe until about 65, just looking at my parents.
Okay,
They
right.
start
So
having
65
grey
is when it hits. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on. Before I interrupted.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't really understand what gambling harm us until I worked for Asian Family Services. I know my father have gambling issues.
Does he still have those issues as well?
Yeah, he keeps saying, I'm going to stop and then go back. I'm going to stop and then go back. It's like a constant revolving doors, you know, like we're just so used to it. We even joke about he like horses more than us.
Oh, God.
I even say he contributed to Hong Kong horse race grasses. That's why he always looks so green. But the things that he does, sometimes even me as a son, when I hear, I was like, this is my father. It's hard to even comprehend the life that he has. And he never lived with us since he started, you know, like affiliated with, you know, like gangster, because he's quite wise though, thank God for it. Like he knew if people know, we will be in danger. So that's why he hid us away.
What do you mean by he hid you guys away?
Yeah, so
like you guys had to move, or yeah.
So if I saw him outside, he told me once, saw him outside hanging around with people, please don't go and say hi to him, because we don't know who he might be hanging around. He told my mom the reason why, you know, like we keep moving is because he have people who after him. So he doesn't want us to get hurt, which is true because a few times he came back with bruises or he disappeared and then came back with bruises. And I never allowed to tell people where I live, my telephone number.
Gosh, that must have been really difficult.
That's why I so fucked up. My counselor's been wonderful. He said I have this, you know, development issues. That's why I don't know how to relate to authority sometimes.
I don't know how to relate to authority. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
because of my father. You know, like, yeah.
It's always the parenting, isn't it?
Thank God. I have someone to blame. But yeah, so it's really challenging. We have a very normal life growing up, beside all the chaos that my father bring, like
very normal except for the chaos.
Like he'll come home because I like music instrument. He will give us money, learn instruments, have a pet, and then when he lost money, he need money, everything will be gone. You know, like
that yo-yo of, you know, that's very unstable, isn't it? It's a very yo-yo of emotions and living conditions.
As you say, avert childhoods, you know, like this how you can ensure your children have anxiety. Usually. And also, I still can't buy expensive things to me. I still fear of, you know, everything I have is going to be stripped away tomorrow. And so that kind of anxiety fear is going to be with me forever.
Well, can I ask, you know, with, you know, you're talking about learning more about gambling harm in New Zealand.
Yes.
So, you know, what is the degree of gambling harm in New Zealand?
That's what the key message actually I really want to share. And then I digress. In New Zealand, for Asians specifically, we are 9.5 times most likely to experience the severe end. Even though,
of gambling addiction?
Yeah.
9.5 times.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
Exactly. So people, like, when I first hear, I was like, what 9.5 times means? So I went and asked the researcher, and then he said 950 times more likely to become severe gambling problems. I was like, wow, 950 times. That's a
950
lot.
or 950 percent?
Percent.
Yeah, 950%.
Percent.
Yeah,
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm not good at mathematics, as you can see. But compared to, of course, then you compare to Maori and Pacific, they also experience significant of gambling harm, which is Pacific about 4 point something, and then Maori about 3 point something.
Like times the risk for Pākehā, like New Zealand European. Yeah.
Exactly. However, when you compare the rest, Asians are at the severe end. But I also want to emphasize, because quite often you hear about gambling harm in deprived communities, where pokies are in Maori and Pacifica, segregated, population is so awful, sorry. However, Asians have a very different story. They came in because they have the wealth, they have the skill, they have the, good health. However, after they came to New Zealand, they don't know what to do. They were bored. So the only place open 24/7, we know where it is. So they went, have a little bit
of casino,
fun.
You mean? Yeah.
Thank you. And because the environments are very welcoming, then they have people speak their language. And before they knew it, they keep going back because they didn't have that warmth.
Right, because they didn't find that social connection elsewhere, and the only place where they can get it from is the casino, who have hired Chinese or Japanese or Korean speaking staff, or whatever language,
and also given some privilege like a VIP,
right? Yeah.
So the treatment is really encouraging of behavior. And what we hear is people lost all their properties. I have one person I met as a peer support worker at the time. He let the wife and the child came here, have all the money, and bought a few properties, and thought, sweet, I'm going to retire working for another 10 years. After he came to New Zealand, realized that she lost all that money from gambling.
Oh my goodness.
And he became so depressed and suicidal. They have to put him in a hospital.
Jeez.
And people didn't know is in the end that person unfortunately,
ended it all.
Yeah. And so, and coming back to gambling harm, people only think about, if you can afford the money, you lose or you win. It's not. The time you're taking away from your family, also that drive or wanting to go back, to the environment so that you can get that.
Because it's a very stimulating environment, isn't it?
Dopamine.
Because all the exactly, all the dopamine, all the lights and the sounds, and that feeling of winning and I'm going to win next time.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I guess that people when we think about gambling harm, really, probably all people generally think about who haven't experienced it, who don't know about it, they're probably just thinking, it's just the financial harm.
Exactly.
It's so awful that these people have lost all this money and assets and whatever. But I think, they forget about your story about that actually the gambling harm is much more than that. It's the harm to the families as well. It's that harm of that yo-yo of, financial instability.
The chaos.
Chaos.
Yeah, I mean, my father would come home, wanted money, and then took all the money my mom saved to pay rent and all that. And then my mom ended up crying. I didn't know. I was just angry with my father. Not until one time I was doing a radio show with my colleagues. And the radio show was hosted in Mandarin. And so after hear all that story, he says, so your father is a victim too. Suddenly, I have
like a victim, do you say? Yeah.
Yeah, I just I never thought about that way. And since then, I completely let go. I was I suddenly able to just wholeheartedly forgive my father because he was a victim. And hence, sometimes I felt I really want the society to understand when you talk about gambling, from the surfer, it's money. But the repercussions of how it then have the ramification of the family is invincible. And if we don't talk about it, people is not going to be educated. The harder things I felt also people who experience gambling harm also are the least likely to seek help because of the stigma, worry about, like how they're going to be perceived, but also wanting to win their money back because they have, like lost so much, they just want to chase it. So it became a vicious cycle as well. And it's not easy journey. My father, when he's not gamble, he's like a zombie, like you can see there is something that is just not there. But when he start, like gambling again, he's upbeat, excited. It's almost like two-person.
It's probably similar to, say, drug addiction.
Yes.
We touched on dopamine, right?
Absolutely.
I guess it's the addiction to that stimulation that, that gambling provides, because that's what drug addiction is really. It's this, there's a chemical component to drug addiction where, some psychoactive drug causes some neurochemical changes in the brain and you get hooked on that feeling that your brain makes. And then with gambling, it's a very similar thing. And we talk about things like, sugar addiction and, or junk food addiction or whatever. And it's all a similar thing, or even like gaming addiction as well. Not even gambling, gaming addiction, which I think is, this big tidal wave that's coming for our young people that I think people are kind of talking about it, but not really. Things like it was like Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite and all these. And I think we saw a lot of that in the pandemic as well, with everyone being at home, is that there was skyrocketing amounts of kids on video games. And kids who usually in the past kids would get together to go for a bike ride or play football in the park, and then they couldn't go outside, so connected through playing Fortnite.
Absolutely. And also we have a spike of phone call during COVID about parents who get so anxious of what to do with their kids because they get temper tantrums, and spend a significant amount of time on online game, and many have never played gaming before. And we even have someone who contact us, a father, realized that the son read out the credit card with a few $1,000s.
Oh gosh.
A lot of parents don't know it's because some of the game you need credit cards, like to kind of unlock and start playing. So they thought a few dollars, what is the harm? For kids who have no sense of, finance and money, if they see something they want to purchase, like a loot box, like where they can open out, have some surprises of skin, they look cool in front of their friend. And again, like that kind of behavior will become, like the positive or negative reinforcement, where you hear something, you get excited, you really want to persuade it. And that got repeated. And the father come to us and asking for help, and we help him and also help to put some support system for the kids, and for the father agreeing on some agreement how then to mitigate that process as well. And again, like not many people pick up a phone call and say, I have these problems, can you help me, from Asian communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard in general, like for anybody, but I think specifically it is harder amongst Asian communities. I mean, for one thing, when we talk about Asian, it's not, I think when people talk about Asian, I think they sort of immediately in their head picture East Asian appearing people, like people who look like a little bit more like me, right? And I wonder, because your Asian Family Services, and I had a look at your website, and actually it's not just East Asian people, right? It's Asia comprises a quite large geographical area. And a very incredibly diverse group of people. So, the needs of, say, like Japanese community is very different from, say, the needs of like an Indian or Pakistani community, very, very, very different. And I think one of the things I want to talk about is really like the needs of the Asian, Asian community at large, right? Because, we've had these recent healthcare reforms and, a lot of us talking about equity, talking about, Māori health and Pacifica health, which we absolutely need to do something about. But what's missing in there is Asian health as well, because, we don't really have a strategy. I don't believe that there's an Asian health strategy. And, I think the key to that is realizing that, we can't just group all of these people into like one group, because like we say, the needs are very different. I mean, in my experience as a doctor, I see for example, in South Asian communities, so Indian and Sri Lankan people have, quite, I'm pretty sure there's research out there, but anecdotally from my experience, I see a lot of Indian and Sri Lankan people with heart attacks, with diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol. And then I think in the East Asian communities, those are a lot lower, right? And so when you add but East Asian communities have their own health problems, right? But then if you add those groups together, then suddenly you've sort of averaged it out.
Absolutely.
And then it looks like actually Asians are all quite healthy because you've kind of like cancelled out the fact that this group over here doesn't have very good health statistics over here and this group over here does. And then you miss the fact that actually our South Asian communities need a lot more help in these sort of metabolic syndrome related illnesses.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because 15 years ago, there were this Asian health chart. I can't remember the name. They were research, as you say, disaggregated all the population of so-called Asian. And that was what the finding were. The South Asians have a higher risk for heart attack and all that. And unfortunately, when we lump together, all our health outcomes look to be relatively healthier compared to other population, and suddenly we don't have any health issues, and we don't have any funding that allocated to the Asian health population. And what I have seen even personally is policy really drive where funding is going to go. And I think the government actually doing the right thing, to cater for vulnerable population. We have no, issue with that because, yes, they have experienced more challenges. However, I think the unintended consequences is suddenly everybody only focusing on these two populations. And then when someone else having the problems, there's no resources or even workforce to go to. We often talk to other Te Ora services because they have, Asians who experience mental distress. They cannot speak the language, they don't know what to do, and they want to pass it on to us. And we are not catered for a secondary or tertiary services. And then this person is stuck in the middle. If they are fortunate to have Asians individual as a health professional, they will be asked to support again, that doesn't mean that this individual will have that cultural competency and understand how to communicate. In our services, we have done a lot of research and look at some of the intrinsic challenges, including half of the Asians still feel like there's lack of language and culture services. So that's why they don't seek help. And when you
and if you don't seek help, then you don't get diagnosed, and then you don't come up in the statistics for health outcomes.
Exactly. And so that's what we've been fighting for is, because during the COVID, we have over 7,000 phone call compared to when we only had 3,000 phone call during non-COVID period. So you're talking about close to, 100 something over percent, and we're still holding the same funding, having the same pool of people answering our Asian helpline. And we were running as a services like a headless chicken, even though it doesn't sound. But it was hard work because, there's no elsewhere people can go to, especially when there were even people who can speak the language. They say when they are putting in front of another, Pagiha, they will give information support that only catered for individualistic culture. And that person feel like they're being labeled of, you codependent with your parents, or you can just move out, because collective culture, Asian kids don't move out until the parents, felt like they marry, it's the time for them to move out. So they were labeled, judged, or being told things that they felt bad about themselves. And when they came to us, they was like, oh my God, it felt like all the stress is gone because someone understood where I'm coming from.
My dad was like, I'm so glad you moved out when you were 17.
Your dad is really unique.
He's very unique. He's a very interesting person.
I know. Yeah. I think he must have seen a lot.
He's seen a lot.
Yeah. Because I feel, like when people really experience vulnerability, like Brene Brown say, they know how to connect to individual. I think your father probably, dissecting your father. Okay, sorry. But I mean, and that is the challenge that we keep facing. And as a services, and also Asian don't fight like other population fight when they are not getting what they want. They just suck it up. I'll just have to do more, to solve my problems. They don't go and protest because they don't feel it's the right thing to do. And even when they have opportunity to connect with government official, they'll only say good things because when you talk to them individually, many will say that they felt as Asians, they already experienced a lot of discrimination and stigma. So they don't want to present their problems and being perceived as this population have issues.
I have a question to put to you. In terms of, because obviously you guys have lots and lots of clients in the Asian community. And I guess one of the things I'm sort of like thinking about a lot is the whole language barrier thing, right? Because obviously we want to bring, we want to have interpreters to bridge that language barrier when we're in the healthcare setting, for example, because that's really, really important. But some things I have been struggling with a little bit is in terms of like the immigrant population who've been here for a while, and what's the barriers between them engaging more with learning English and engaging more with the local culture? Is it that the local New Zealand culture is not welcoming? Are we not doing enough to encourage the learning of English or te reo? There's been a few times where I see patients at work and they're elderly patients who, I never expect an elderly, Chinese person to speak English, right? But, you kind of hope that, if you don't have an interpreter, you kind of hope, do they have like an adult child that would like help them? Because I think about myself and I think about my parents and, even though my dad speaks really good English, if my dad needed to go to the hospital, I would go there in a heartbeat, partly because he's my dad and partly because I'm like, I've got to make sure that, the doctors there look after him right. And so I find it challenging when I'm like, it's quite blasé that is there no effort to try and engage, because you've got to meet people halfway. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
When you're trying to engage with the healthcare services.
Yeah. Well, I think when people are so used to one culture, suddenly they have to relearn. It can be quite scary also when people are so comfortable working to a norm where you know what to do and suddenly you kind of feel like, what should I do? Eventually people just going to avoid. And when school talking to us, like how we make sure international students are welcoming, I told them identify someone in your group where they have some leadership skill, support that individual to become a little bit of a peer, able to share, like knowledge, skill, kind of just pass it on. Another study look at, like social rejections, where people being socially rejected. And the finding were those pain are equally like our physical pain. And when people were prescribed, like Panadol or something, that pain kind of reduce. And so social rejections can be hard, especially when individually they just don't feel welcoming. And then I also hear a lot of, like schools who run international students program also see a lot of teachers don't know how to communicate with international students. I think
the social rejection must be a lot for young Asian kids because for me, growing up Asian in a majority New Zealand European school and community, that was really challenging. I had to assimilate, and, I've reflected on this a lot. It's like, how much have I given up in terms of like my own Asian culture, there are certain foods that like my parents will cook that I'm like, I don't want it because it's yuck. And then my partner who's, he's English, he'll eat them. And so he's actually the favorite child. And it's just the whole balance of like assimilating versus versus, retaining completely retaining your own culture. And something I kind of like touch on as well is, I guess, how Asians are portrayed in the media is something that, will heavily affect Asian mental health as well. I've got, if you're, especially, I guess, if you're an Asian male, you're, in the social media and pop culture, the Asian male is not particularly seen as attractive or, wanted, right? And then if you're an Asian woman, then it's like, it's a double-edged sword, because you're either, attractive because, what's the word? You've been, what's the word? When you've been like eroticized, right? For being this like Oriental, like, or you're like not wanted because you're like, not white. So it's just, it must be really challenging that kind of rejection as well. And I think that's probably something that's underreported, really, the mental health of young Asian people as well.
And also to have that dialogue, because correct, and Asian Family Services have this documentary called The In-Betweeners. It's okay to be in both worlds. Were the reason of, the productions of the documentary. And many young people say that they feel anxious. They're not too sure who they are. If they're too white, the parents is going to say, you are Asian, remember where's your roof. If they're too Asian, the peer is going to laugh at them and say, oh, you're too Asian. And one of the things I remember is the participant told me when she walked into a situation, she always have to ask herself, do I need to be more white or more Asian today? And, of course, people is going to get anxious when you have to kind of become like chameleons, or just adjusting your color scheme to suit whatever that audience were. And another problem also is, for someone like me growing up in Malaysia, where we have the same population, we have that in the whole society culture being embraced. Norm, that's a big thing. But for someone who, then if I have children, if I just, kind of enforce that to my children, they never had that as a reflection to know where they're coming from. Whatever the society that they go out to, they can't find a reference point. So they're going to be like, why my father taught me that when what I'm seeing is not. They not necessarily have those verbal skill to articulate it, but they sense it. And eventually, if someone who able to mitigate the process themselves will come out, it's going to be a shining star, because that person is going to be so smart, able to, see how they going to, do things, negotiate both culture. If someone who is very sensitive, they're just going to think it must be me.
So I do find it hard, the whole straddling both worlds, right? Because I do sometimes feel like, especially when I leave Auckland, I'm like, I just feel like I stick out like a sore thumb. Just even the other day on LinkedIn, actually, I shared a post and someone for no reason just decided to comment something along the lines of, never trust anyone you can blindfold with a piece of string. For no reason. Just, that's just something that's blatantly racist for no reason, just on a public LinkedIn profile post, like LinkedIn post. Unnecessary. And you just kind of like, it was kind of not fitting in stuff. It's like, no matter how much you can do, no matter how much you can contribute to, New Zealand, no matter how much you can assimilate, talk like a New Zealander, walk like a New Zealander, that's still that feeling is that to some people you never will be like a New Zealander, and that's hard because there's that on the one side, and then also there have been times where I feel like because I got a little bit of like Laji Mandarin, rubbish Mandarin, right? And then I speak Mandarin sometimes. I find that that's something that's been difficult for me is speaking Mandarin and connecting with like Chinese people because then they're like, oh, your Mandarin's a bit shit. And then I'm like, I would never say that your English is a bit shit.
I was like, wow. What?
But you know what I mean?
I know.
And I'm like, gosh, like this is
so rude, isn't it?
But I just know that if like a white person spoke the Mandarin that I spoke, they'd be like, oh my God, that's so amazing.
That's so cute.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, Jesus, guys.
I tell you though, I'm so happy you mentioned that. And that's what I have. Because when I saw your post, I thought young people need to see it. I was just so blown away by your openness, like posting it. As an Asian, I know how much courage you have to put yourself forward. So please don't stop being yourself. Dr. Sue. There will be many young girl is going to be like, oh my God, I can be like her. Seriously. You know, like, so I'm so glad when you reach out to me. I say, oh, I like a little superstar. And also all the work you did and keep advocating for. And so, yeah, remember there's always cheerleader behind you, just like your mom.
Yeah, my mom. My mom's a cutie. Yeah, but I think like my mom is kind of like the opposite of like a tiger mom. So my mom is always like, you're doing too much. Like, can you not do so much? I'd rather you did less.
Yeah, self-care, isn't it?
Do less. Yeah. Just like enjoy yourself. Yeah. My mom, it's so funny. It was after I got into medical school, my mom was like, I never thought you'd get into medical school. And she's like, I joke about it with her, and she's like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean it like that. And I'm like, but you didn't think I would get into medical school? And she's like, oh, it's only because like other people's kids got like, you know, straight A pluses, and you only got 3 out of 4 A pluses. So that's why. And I was just like, oh, thanks, Mum. Thank you for believing in me.
But like my mom as well, when I graduated from, you know, like AUT, and I was like, what, you finish your degree? Because I never were a good student because of my mental health issue. I never able to do well. However, going back to what you say, you know, like, and that's why when I was getting the funding and doing the in-betweeners, is that I hope school pick it out and have that dialogue. I felt so unfair. Why these kids have to mitigate that, you know, like societal norm and all that, become the conduits between their father's parents' world and the school world? Why not having that conversation? So healthy.
But I do feel like, you know, there's a hope, because I feel like things are changing.
Yes.
Things are changing.
Yes.
And I feel like, hear me out, I think it's cool to be Asian now, right? Because I sometimes I go dancing on the North Shore, and it's like a hip hop dance studio called On Beat Dance Studio, and it's run by 2 Asians. So the woman, she's Korean, and her husband is Filipino, and they're like proud Asians, which is great. I mean, they're like, I think they're like 1.5 generation or first generation in New Zealand, and they've got a young kid as well, and like their dance studio is like full of like young people. A lot of them are Asian, and a lot of like, you know, teenagers who are Asian, and I'm like, oh, you guys go, because like it's cool to be Asian. It's cool to like, you know, be into K-pop and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. So I'm like, far out, because I carried a lot of like, I think, Asian shame when I was growing up. Like, you know, I wasn't allowed to look Asian. I wasn't allowed to dress like I was Asian. I wasn't allowed to like Asian like music and things like that, because it wasn't cool. And now I'm like, far out. If I was just born 10 years later, I'd be so cool.
I know, right? You're not going to be the only one, even like in the school. I know, even when I look at Howard, you know, like secondary school and primary school, majority are Asian, some of the school, which is great. And I think the idea is, even when I think people sometimes get too concerned about what to say or what to ask. And even when, you know, I know a lot of Pakeha have good heart, but they don't know how to react. It's like, just ask. You know, like that's how we gain knowledge, isn't it? And that's how we learn. And I often encourage people, you know, like if even you know, like, because we do a lot of presentation and all that about cultural competency, and encourage people. I can present my view and what I found from, you know, textbook and research.
Well, I think, you know, looking at the data in terms of predictions of the years to come, in the next decades, I think New Zealand demographic is going to be rapidly changing. Absolutely. I think I was reading somewhere that over half of New Zealanders are going to be Māori, Pacifica or Asian. Yeah. And I think we need to, you know, keep up with that and realize that actually we need to do the best that we can. In terms of social cohesion, we need to be looking at, well, what's the future of New Zealand going to look like, and how are we going to be prepared for that, and how are we going to be able to make sure that we can bridge that gap, because we know that people who are coming in from overseas are going to have different viewpoints, different perspectives, and how can we make sure that New Zealand, you know, keeps the best parts of New Zealand as, you know, our demographics are changing.
Absolutely. Just like going to the street here, it's like so many restaurants. Like, which world can you go and have all the best food? So amazing.
So I'll ask you one last question.
Sure.
That's all we've got time for at the moment. What is your favorite dessert of all time?
Oh my God, I have so many.
Which one's your favorite? Like off the top of your head. Okay.
Oof. I like this Chinese dessert that have whipped creams in between and then the almonds, but I don't know what they call it.
Is it like a bun?
Yeah,
or
like
is it like
bun.
a, okay.
Yeah, it's only in the Chinese cake shops.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, bakery. So
okay, well, do you have a favorite like Chinese like bakery?
yeah, I don't even know the name. There's
Oh my gosh. Okay, where is it? Where is it?
They have one over the Dominion Road. It's a Chinese. They also have Sunstar or something. I think that's called
Sunstar?
Sunstar. I can't remember the name.
Okay, but a Chinese bakery on Dominion Road has this whipped cream bun thing, and it's the best.
Yeah, with almonds on the top.
Almonds on top. Okay, I'll remember that.
Yeah. I don't mind getting fat with that one.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Ivan.
Thank you, Dr. Su. It's been amazing.
Revolving Door Syndrome acknowledges Māori as tangata whenua and Te Tiriti o Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We recognise the inequities and challenges faced by Indigenous and vulnerable groups and acknowledge our duty to work towards closing the gap.